welcome back. It's Christina again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw a gang parrot, or cockatoo. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet. I'm drawing straight into Photoshop, so let's get arting. Okay, so here is the gang. So we are gonna get started. I'm gonna do the whole thing in shadow first. Which, when I'm talking about shadow, I just mean light pin pressure. So on the beaks, that's pretty straightforward because it's just, you have light pin pressure. As I pull it over, you're trying to match the contour of the beak. Right, so you swoop down here, swoop back up. Try not to put too many lines in the same spot because that'll do the same thing that too much pin pressure will do as well. Right. And then I have the beak color changing over to like a lighter brown instead of this grayer brown at the tips and inside the mouth, because we can kind of see a little bit inside the mouth too. Right, so it's just this light pin pressure. And for reference, this is full pin pressure. You see the difference? Pretty significant. But following the contour, with the feathers and stuff, it's a little easier because it's kind of already primed for that. That's actually why I'm starting with the beak first, is the lines by the beak need to be a little cleaner than elsewhere. I mean, this style still works, but when you're dealing with things that are a little neater, it needs to be a little cleaner. Right, and just sort of building this up on both the top and the bottom beak. So I'm going to get the beaks done in shadow, both the top and the bottom here, and I will be right back. And by beaks, I mean beaks singular, not beaks plural, which is what I just said. That's all. Okay, so I'm probably going to make some changes where I add a little bit more brown into this beak here, but for now, I think that'll work. And then I'm going to take kind of this bluish grayish color. I'm going to go around the eye real fast. Again, still in shadow, but usually around eyes, the skin's a little bit more leathery for birds. So I am kind of doing this very light, but up and down motion. You can kind of see that. Right, I'm going down, and then I'm going left, and I'm going right, and I'm kind of swooping my strokes to be a little circular. Being very careful by the eye, because eyes are the first things that we look at. Right, and just this creates, by drawing it in this way, it creates a textured effect. So it'll appear leathery. It's a good way to add, just changing your strokes around the way that I'm doing here is a good way to add texture with this style. Okay. So now that's in place. We're going to get the red before we get the rest of this blue or gray. So their heads are red. And then it turns into like a grayish blue elsewhere. So again, I'm doing all of this in shadow, but I am sticking within, right, if I very lightly sketch this out, I'm sticking within the individual kind of feathers I've drawn. And I'll show you how that looks in just a second. I'm just sort of building this up. Takes a little longer to do, but the effect is pretty cool, usually at the end. And there are ways to do this that are a little quicker. Right, so if I take off the feathers, you can still see the individual feathers. So I'm going to do this whole thing, all the red and shadow on his face, and I'll be right back. All right, it's kind of that fringe that makes them so distinctive, because it just sort of comes up. It's kind of cute, the way it comes up. Okay, so now we have this kind of, I don't know, bluish gray of the rest of the body. And then at the end of each of these sections, there's actually white tips. I've kind of marked where the white's going to be. So in addition to the gray of the feathers, again, this light pin pressure, and I am going sideways instead of straight up and down. It'll make it a little quicker and easier to do this. Effect should still hold as long as I give it a big enough gap. Plus, we'll be adding white to all these tips, so that makes a difference. If I take that back off, you can kind of see there. And then again, these feathers all have white on their tips. At least that's what it looks like, so that's what I'm going to do. But first I'm going to do the whole thing in gray, all of this, drawing that sort of sideways as you saw, and I will be right back. Going to start adding highlights in. Before I do that, I'm going to fix something real quick in the red. Just kind of looked funny the way it was. Now I did kind of already sketch out where some of these shadows would be. So I have the light source coming from above and a little bit to the right. So you have this backside will be in a shadow. The other thing I'm going to do before I get to the gray, honestly I forgot to do, is add a strip of white to the ends of all of these, but because it's just one strip, it'd probably be easier to wait till the highlighting stage anyway. Okay, so when I'm adding highlights to things, actually I wonder, maybe I should start with the beaks. I keep saying beaks like he has more than one. The beak, singular, because the feathers will go up over that, right? So edge would be a little bit in shadow, so you don't have to go all the way to the edge, but I am adding not only more pin pressure, but adding extra lines will also brighten things up. And the transition in color here that I have it's not a hard transition. I'm probably going to mix some of this more tan into this grayish of the beak. I didn't do that yet, but it'll be easier to do once I add the highlights. Right, so underneath the beak, it's going to go into shadow. I do have a bulge here, and I am adding some shadow a little bit extra, which I may or may not get rid of. You're going to have the top of the bottom beak, and I forgot to mark underneath, but underneath is going to go into shadow as well. Right, as we start transitioning underneath. The beak will round away and into shadow. And we're going to just taper off pin pressure and lessen the lines until we kind of blend it in as it goes further and further down. And then we'll throw that off just to see how it looks. I'm going to temper out this just a little bit. Doing kind of that same thing over here. Again, a little bit fluid as to where the lines cut off in between the two colors. Being mindful that the bottom section of the beak we'll have some shadow cast on it from above. You're going to have, so over here is, this would be potentially catching the light, depending on exactly where your light source is. I'm going to brighten it up though, which will leave room for me to come in, right, because this is inside the mouth, so we'll come in and taper this off as we bring this into his mouth. Really indicate that it's kind of going into a darker recess, but also have it prominent enough we can clearly see it. And then I'm going to push this tan color throughout this beak here. Not much. I'm doing actually really light pin pressure, but you can see how nicely that shows up. Just sort of blends it all. I'm going to do the gray by the eye real fast. Just because, once again, you know, you have the red that will be up over, right? So I'm going to create that up and down action just like we did when we were first drawing it. Under the eye, create a nice little burst where the light would really be catching. Over the eye, not as much. And leaving a little bit of a dark outline where the feathers are pushing up and over, so potentially creating a shadow. Now for the red. Right, and this is just, you know, going in and filling in the feathers. Right by the face, I don't have quite as much of like the clumped feathers together. It's a little bit loose, which is true for birds. They tend to have a lot of smaller fur-like feathers by the nose. And that's no different here. But otherwise, you know, I'll stay within the individual feathers that I've drawn out. So, relatively straightforward here. Especially since I've already drawn the shadows in. So I'm going to get all of the red done, all the highlighting on the red here, and I will be right back. Alright, so now before I go any further, I am going to add the white to the ends of all of these. This won't take long, right? It's just a matter of I'm using the shadows because I'm putting kind of full pin pressure here, or not full pin pressure, but I'm not really backing it off intentionally. So by knowing exactly where the shadows are, that's where I will back it off. Right, so back in these areas, I'll do it much lighter. For the highlights of the blue. Right, so I'm not drawing over the white I just did. And I'll leave some gap to allow for shadowing. In fact, what I think I'm going to do is drop you under the white so the white remains what's on top. I'm just getting some of the other details kind of finalized here. Sort of tapering in this transition a little bit on the back side, but otherwise it's mostly done as far as that is concerned. Okay, so we are going to do a quick addition of something I didn't do down here by the beak. There's like a little bit of like the way the beak connects together right through here, and that would be catching some light. Like the eye, it's like tougher skin. Okay. picked up. And we'll add highlights through here instead of all the way at the end. I don't want it overwhelming the composition. Okay, so now we have the eye. I didn't sketch out what color that was going to be, but it's going to be brown. It's pretty standard for most animals to have brown eyes, and gangangs are, I hope I'm saying that right, I'm sure I am. Gangangs are no exception. Right, so I'm going to draw on the pupil first. I'm going to actually shift that a little bit. Yeah. So you can play around right when you're drawing what direction you want it to look in. You can have it looking forward or backwards or up. Just know that the pupil will shift around just a little bit. It doesn't take much. Right from there to there has him looking in a completely different section. You see what I'm doing, right? There, it's only like a nudge forward, and there's a nudge back. There, it looks like he's looking at us, and the other way it looks like it's looking forward. So now I'm not coming all the way to the top. I leave that to be like a shadow for the top of the eye. Sometimes with birds I don't do that, but I think with the gang it'd be fine. And then I'm going to very lightly not come up that high. Very lightly not do what I just did. And create a semicircle all the way around. As I bring this over, I bring my brush strokes down. Same thing on this side. Bring it over, I bring my brush strokes down, right? Because that's the angle of this. I match that angle with the, when I'm drawing in the color of the eye here, the iris. Right, bring it all the way around. That was probably too bright. Might not be. We're going to take it off anyway. Just sort of fill it in fully. Right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the elliptical Maki tool, come in and create a nice circle for the pupil. Just cleans up the edge. I'm going to erase what I already have, and then I'm going to inverse. Select inverse and then draw at a different angle just to get the pupil nice and clean. You don't have to do this, and I don't have to do this. Admittedly, that's just because, you know, as a digital artist, I can use these tools to help me out, make sure that's a nice and clean area. Then I'm going to just deselect it, and you see how much cleaner that is than what I had drawn. All right, so now light source coming from above and to the right means that the pupil on the left and bottom, and this is full pin pressure, going to have a nice burst of light. And then on the side of the light source, you're going to have the highlight there all the way underneath the eye, right? So it's going to go all the way under here. I'm going to taper it off at the edges, and as it goes into the darkness, and by the pupil on that side as well. And then on this back side, we're going to sort of blend it in. So this isn't in highlight, but it's not necessarily in full shadow either. That's reserved for the top. Still making sure we're tapering it off as we bring it down and around. Right. And then we can brighten this up on the areas with the highlight, right? Just a matter of like filling that in more. We'll brighten it up more. Now before we add the white of the eye, I am actually, and I was debating on if I was going to do this, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to take like a lighter color, probably a little bit more yellow, and I'm going to do sort of squiggles in the eye. I'll do this sometimes, I don't always do it, but it's just like I make a quick up, down, right? A whole bunch of squiggles. Nothing big. And it's more concentrated in the areas of highlight. You don't want it going into the pupil, you don't want it going off the edge, so I'm going to have to clean up what I've done a little bit and not fill in like I just did. And you just kind of follow the edge of the pupil around, right? So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to clean it up. This is too much to the edge. None of that would happen. And then any of these that breached into the pupil, also none of that would happen. Right, but it gives it a little bit like extra dimension to the eye. Like I said, it'll be brighter. more concentrated where the highlight of the eye is, so on the underneath and to the right. And then I can also, what I will sometimes do, is add just a little bit of light against the pupil as well. It's just indicating the light's hitting it right. And yeah, I don't always do it. You don't have to do it. It just sort of adds another dimension. And because we have so much muscles in our eyes, it kind of mimics that just a little bit. So then I'm going to take the white. I'm going to do what I call the light flare. So that's just in the area that has, fill that in. That might be too much. I'm going to see how it looks. It's not horrible, but I'm going to do it again. Right, you can kind of play around with it. So if you want to like mimic trees, you can have a line coming in and then up for the darkness of the tree, and then bushes and other shapes, and then even bringing that down so that it matches a little bit, and it still kind of has that look. See, that looks a lot better. And it looks like it's reflecting things happening within the bird's eyes, like a tree or something. And you can adjust or add more or do whatever as you want to add more dynamicism to the sort of the light flare against the eye there. Now, I don't know. It's interesting because he's already such an interesting mix of colors, but if you go into yellow, come up here, maybe dull this out a little bit more. Maybe come down there. I'm going to add the yellow to create sort of a highlight. And I'm only going to add this on areas where the light would be at its brightest. Right, so through here, maybe a little bit through here, just where it hits there. And then anywhere where that light would really be bright and hitting. It's unnaturally bright. It's meant to be unnaturally bright, not putting a ton of pin pressure. It's just kind of meant to add some extra depth to it. Again, not putting a whole lot of pin pressure though, because it can be too much. You can overdo this. Typically we'll always put it above and below the eye. Eyes are important to us as humans. It's the first thing we look at, so having that is kind of important. And not everywhere where there's highlight. It really is just kind of looking at a composition and then playing it by ear where you think it would make the most sense to have it. Obviously not where any of the shadows are. And then kind of tapering off as need be depending on how bright of the color that I chose. In this case it's pretty bright. So tapering off, or not putting a whole lot of lines, 1 or 2 lines, tapering off as I go away from a hard light source. We're going to be adding blue for shadows next. We'll be doing the same thing, right? Playing it by ear. Okay, we're going to do it all the way down in here as well. Right, bearing in mind where the light source is, because that's where the strongest bit of highlight would be. Above and to the right. And then we could even do it into our little bits of feathers up here. Not like that though, that was just a whole bunch of lines in the same spot. We are going to add blue, it's going to be a bright blue, in the shadows. So even like down here in the mouth, right? Very light pin pressure, it's super easy to overdo the blue. And if I want to, I can change the highlight, like if I think it's too much, I could change it. Just debating on if the yellow's the right color. I feel like the yellow pops nicely. Well, I'm inclined to leave it. But I also don't want people thinking that it's yellow all over the bird, because it's not. I could do orange or red. Well, see, he's already red though. That's the part of the problem. And the blue on top of this blue, you can still see, which is important, it'll flush out that blue a little bit. Because it's such a different, family of blue. Much more saturated for one. I think maybe I'm going to take that yellow. I don't think it's bad. I think it adds a lot to it, so I definitely don't want to get rid of it. But I'm worried it's just going to make it look quite like just a little bit too much. So we're going to go down to like an orange. Same idea. And we're keeping it in that same brightness, right? Like I'm not undoing that. Just going to temper it by going to an orange instead. Yeah. And then it doesn't look like, you know, the red is yellow. Likewise, I don't know if the blue, because of the blue under here, makes it not read right. I don't know though, it really kind of looks good. There is a gang parrot, or it's a cockatoo? Gang, you know, from Australia. Alright, so that's how you draw gang. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me I have other videos of art tutorials I've done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.